Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for Peptide and Hormone Therapy A4M webinar sponsored by PNOE. Before we do get started, I would like to share that any questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A icon located in the Zoom toolbar. Today's webinar will be recorded and available on the A4M website for your convenience. Now let me turn it on over to Panos to start with our webinar. Welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm Panos, the co-founder of PNOE. PNOE is a company that has made VO2max metabolic testing easy and accessible for the average provider and health practitioner. And today with me, I have Jason Minimon, who is one of our valued affiliates. He is currently operating several different practices where he's applying different longevity and other modalities in order to improve people's lives, make them live longer and better. And he's been utilizing the PNOE Metabolic and VO2max analyzer in his practice, along with several other testing modalities and treatments. And he's probably one of the most seasoned and experienced people to talk about how you can merge biometric testing with longevity modalities into a cohesive, holistic, integrative program. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining me here, and excited to have this conversation with you. Yes, we can start by having you share a little bit more background about yourself, how you came into the space, a lot of military experience, a lot of experience for different backgrounds. But I guess let's start with that.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you again for having me on. The partnership with PNOE has been fantastic. It's one of the core pillars that we have from an assessment perspective. And for our health and wellness companies, we're really big on the assessment side of things and really trying to understand people's systems as a whole before we make any sort of recommendations on wellness, longevity, weight management, and things like that. Because I think that's one of the things that's really being missed in not only the medical space, but also in the wellness practicing space. We're seeing an explosion of wellness companies, which is great, right? And we're seeing that whole shift move towards functional medicine and wellness, and people are really becoming advocates for their own healthcare. But I think a lot of times we're putting the cart before the horse, and we're falling into some of the same traps that we see from traditional medical practice, right? Where we're applying remediations to symptoms instead of really understanding root causes and core functions of somebody's systems before putting recommendations in place and things like that. And that's kind of the reason why we started NewMe as a whole is to kind of change the perspective on how we were making that approach and how we were approaching wellness and really kind of understanding somebody's systems as a whole. And we've really broken it down into 5 main categories. We look at body composition analysis. We look at cardiometabolics. We look at blood chemistry. We look at functional genomics and DNA pathways. And we look at the neurological system through brain scanning and cognitive screening. And we feel that those assessments, no different than a car, right? You have a lot of moving parts inside of a vehicle, and they all kind of need to work together to have that system function properly. And so when you have degradation in one of those systems, a lot of times it can lead to problems in other systems. And so instead of trying to remediate just that particular symptom that's coming up, we try to really look under the hood as a whole and really understand how all those systems are functioning together to really make a decision on what is needed to help clients reach their wellness goals.
No, this is a very helpful introduction, and thank you for this. I think as a next step, what a lot of potential PNOE affiliates or existing PNOE affiliates are wondering, how do you bring all of this information together into a system that collectively digests all of the different biomarkers? I know the situation and the complexity can get out of hand when you're adding, all of the cohort of cardiometabolic PNOE biomarkers and you merge that with blood biomarkers, and the blood panels themselves like can also become quite extensive. Like if you're doing something like function health, they're collecting anywhere between 100 to 150 biomarkers. And, if you're starting to add more complex things that are in many cases are very foreign, like, brain imaging or MRI, things can get out of hand. So what is a workflow that a clinic like yours needs to have in place in order to make sense of all of this information and avoid getting itself buried in tremendous amounts of data that end up becoming non-actionable, neither for the practitioner nor for the patient?
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the challenges that we really set out to try to alleviate. And that was one of the things when we started to kind of go through this process. That was actually one of the biggest challenges: is how do we have one central collection point for all of this information? Because when we started kind of going through and adding these different modules, we started seeing the volume of data that we were going to have to intake and analyze and things like that. And so, unfortunately, I don't have a really good answer for that, because we had to build a lot of infrastructure to be able to support that. But I think for clinics that are just starting out, I think it's starting with the basics, right? And a lot of times, because a lot of the wellness stuff can go a lot of different areas, but at its core, for most people and most clients, it's taking care of the building blocks. It's taking care of the base functionality, getting the base metabolic system under control, lung function, heart function, oxygen circulation, exercise activity, things like that, and then nutrition, right? And really making sure that the building blocks are all set there before you start really going into a deep dive of some of the other categories. And I think that's one of the areas, which is why, when we were talking about this podcast, I was really interested, because, I feel that's where the mark is being missed a lot of times, is when we're putting some of these therapies out there, like hormone therapy, peptide therapy, weight loss medications, these types of things. There's not really being enough care being understood on how the body systems are functioning before putting those medications in place or putting those therapies in place. And a lot of times it can make the system even more tangled, right? So, what we've done from a workflow perspective is, we first start off with just a consultation. We start off with a wellness consultation and really understanding what the client's needs are, what their goals are, what they've done, existing to get them where they are, some things that they've struggled with, some things that has worked well for them, and things like that. And then from there, we'll make a recommendation on what we see from a baseline of testing, right? And so based on what their goals are and some of the challenges that they have, where is a good starting point? Because the one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to overwhelm the system. As great as all these testing procedures are, you want to get just people started, right? And get them moving in that direction. And then a lot of the stuff can be added on afterwards, after you get the baseline. And the PNOE system's been great, because what it does is it gives us a lot of that baseline functionality. It gives us insight into a lot of the core functions. It gives us insight into calorie requirements and macro requirements and cardio-metabolic function and things like that, to really understand and use that as a building block to really kind of get things moving forward. Then we couple that with nutrition and those types of things to really kind of get those building blocks set.
Yeah. And, what I wanted to do at this point is maybe share a little bit of background, sort of scientific background for our listeners around what breath analysis is, because a lot of people tend to associate breath analysis exclusively with measuring calories or measuring VO2max, but as a matter of fact, is a much more comprehensive assessment. So I'm just going to do a very quick slideshow here.
Yeah, and that's actually, you brought up a really interesting point. That was one of the biggest education points that we had to really put into our ecosystem, is when everybody looked at the testing initially, they're like, oh, that's just for high performing athletes, or that's just for, people doing high level training and things like that. And really it's one of our most critical assessment tools just for the general population as a whole.
100%. And people will understand why that's the case when they understand like what is happening under the hood. So what you're seeing here is the fundamental sensor signals from a cardiometabolic analyzer like PNOE. again, the same system, the same signals would be found to any medical grade cardiometabolic analyzer. Ours obviously has very significant advantages because it's small, it's portable, it's easy to use, but the fundamental science doesn't really change, hasn't really changed in decades. So what is happening here is you're looking at flow volume. That's the first graph, right? This is the, exhalation, inhalation, exhalation, inhalation. And then as you're measuring volumes, right, you're also measuring concentration of oxygen and concentration of CO2. When someone exhales, right, and air from deeper within the lungs reaches the sensor, you're looking at reduction in oxygen concentration. That is expected because the air has spent more time within the lungs and the alveoli O2 CO2 exchange has been given more time. So more O2 has been absorbed and more CO2 has been discharged. And that's why you're seeing the drop in O2 and the rise in CO2. So what you're doing after you collect these signals is you're doing signal processing and you're starting to calculate different things within the signal. For instance, you're calculating the area under the graph for certain things, or you're determining points of interest in these curves. And by doing so, you're basically coming up with these 23 cardiometabolic biomarkers, right? And some of them are quite famous, like VO2 peak or VO2 max. Others like metabolic rate, how many calories our body's burning. This is information that is being computed exclusively by looking into the three waveforms we presented in the previous graph. But in addition to these two more quote unquote famous biomarkers, you're also looking into things that not a lot of people are aware of, but they're very valuable. For instance, O2 pulse. So, which is the amount of oxygen your heart is pumping into the system per heartbeat. And that, for instance, is a very, very critical biomarker for a person's cardiovascular health. You're looking at things as end-tidal CO2, which is the highest level of CO2 concentration detected during exhalation. And that end-tidal CO2 is extremely important in order to understand hyperventilation, which in and of itself is a very important indicator of whether someone is breathing normally and whether someone is providing enough oxygen around the body, because the rate with which our blood oxygenates our body is dependent on how much CO2 we have in the blood, which in turn is measured by looking at end-tidal CO2. So you're looking into all of these 23 biomarkers, right? And collectively, these 23 biomarkers are basically painting the health of these systems you see here. You're looking at the lungs, the heart, the cells. So, these are the three main systems that collectively comprise the oxygen chain, right? But then at the same time, because of strong associations between our breathing and other systems in our body, like our posture or our nervous system, you can also infer information about these auxiliary systems, as we call them. So your nervous system, your posture, etc.
Yep.
Jason, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's actually a really good point. We actually ended up wrapping, because of the level of testing and the data that we were seeing coming back, we actually ended up wrapping a lot more service offerings at our facility to provide remediation in a lot of these categories. I mean, we've gone through and I've added breathwork practitioners and things like that to give people access to breathwork coaching, because when we started realizing how interlinked a lot of these systems were, it became really evident that if we were going to, even something as simple as weight management, right? I say simple, but and at its core, it is relatively simple. But when you look at something as simple as weight management, right? So we do a cardio-metabolic test and we see somebody's results come back to where their body is burning glucose and carbohydrates at a rate of, say, 50 or 60%, when it should be burning fats at 75% or greater, right? So that's an immediate marker for us that we know, hey, this person has some sort of deficiency in their system because their body is not oxidizing fat properly. And when the body's not oxidizing fat, it's storing it. And if it's storing body fat and they're having weight management issues, there's a pretty solid link between the two there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the fact that you're looking into all of these different systems and you have the ability to connect the underlying biomarkers with specific modalities is one of the main reasons why the PNOE report becomes a core upselling engine for a lot of practices in the space. So what that means is that you do the test. The beauty of the test, which is also reflected in this graph, is that it's simple. It is very comprehensive. It looks into a plurality of systems within the body. And it looks into these systems in a very reliable and accurate way. And it does all of that without requiring any sort of blood draw or invasive procedure. And it gives you all of this information instantly. So because of that, and also the fact that we connect the different services with the underlying biomarkers, we present the affiliate with a report that allows them to upsell IVs, different longevity treatments, different supplements. So that's sort of the business angle, the business enablement angle of the report.
So I refer to that as the link, right? The link in the chain. It's one piece of equipment that we have. Like all of our other assessments are great, and we do a really deep dive analysis. But what we found with the cardiometabolic system is it's the one piece that kind of takes all of those systems and it bridges the link of all of those together between recovery modalities, between wellness modalities and things like that. It's the bridge that kind of ties all of those together.
Yeah, 100%. All in all, for people to have a basic high level understanding of what do you expect as the patient workflow is, you start with a test, like a 10-minute test. That's either the resting test or the exercise test, and then it gives you the complete picture that we talked about before.
Yeah.
One of the most quote unquote sexy biomarkers these days is biological age. We actually calculate or estimate biological age with arguably one of the best ways, which is 𝐷2max, because 𝐷2max provides the strongest predictor of how long and well someone is going to live. And so, that becomes one of the, very important selling points for our users.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually been highly accurate compared to even a lot of the other biological testing that we've done. The assessments and comparative analysis, it's actually a very, very close marker and highly accurate, much more than we expected when we first started.
No, that's great. So Jason, I mean, that was sort of like a parenthesis for people to get a better understanding of what PNOE is and what the test provides, right? Let's maybe move on to specifics about the different modalities, peptides, as well as other stuff like supplement IVs, etc. You guys are doubling down on, and what kind of outcomes are you guys seeing? What kind of engagement do you think inclusion of these treatments within your practice is actually driving? Because a lot of people out there constantly wonder, what is the next thing I should invest in? In many cases, bringing in a new service means hiring specialized personnel with the necessary credentials. So you guys are doing great. What would you, recommend? What would you advise people on?
Yeah. So and you're exactly right. So as we've kind of gone through that, to your point, we've had to add specialists and staff in these particular areas, because as we do more and more work around some of the auxiliary therapies that are available, whether it be peptide therapy, whether it be GLP and GIP medications, whether it be hormone replacement therapy, breath work, all these different things, alongside of our recovery modalities with red light therapy, hyperbarics, those types of things, molecular hydrogen. It's really important before putting a plan together for somebody that you understand what their needs are, right? And because I go back to, a lot of times we're in both the medical space and what I've seen in the wellness space is a lot of time we're just throwing these modalities at symptoms, right? Which is no different than medical professionals throwing medications at symptoms, right? And so we're kind of falling into, I'm seeing the wellness community sometimes fall into that particular space where they are, the technologies are really, really good. The GLP medications are fantastic when used properly. Peptide therapy, incredible technology. Hormone therapy, incredible therapy, but it has to be applied properly. And you have to make sure that the systems are set up to be able to properly receive what what the functions of those therapies are actually intended to do, right? And so one of the common examples that I use is GLP and GIP medications, right? So with GLP medications, if somebody has deficiencies in their cardiometabolic system, or they're metabolically compromised, or they have metabolic slowdown, and then you incorporate a GLP medication on top of that, which is going to suppress appetite at a high level and slow things down even more, you're going to get a negative compounding effect when it comes to that, right? So a lot of times doing the analysis gives us the insight to understand how that person's systems are actually functioning, making sure that we get them functioning properly first, get their metabolic system functioning, get their GI system functioning properly. Then when we put them on these medications or these therapies, the results are fantastic, right? Versus causing potentially negative effects in somebody's systems. Because the last thing you want to do is take somebody with a metabolically compromised system, or somebody that has, GI deficiency or things like that, and put them on a GLP medication. So we use that for that. We look at it. We do a lot of the blood chemistry with hormone therapies. We do a lot of these assessments to really kind of understand how those systems are really functioning, to be able to get an accurate assessment of how things are operating inside of the system. So for us, it's one of those things where, we've kind of not only doubled down on a lot of the therapies that we provide, whether it be recovery modalities, whether it be peptide therapies and things like that, but we've really kind of doubled down on the assessments and making sure that those systems are actually functioning properly before applying those different therapies.
What are your thoughts on combining these sort of like more novel therapies with more traditional stuff, like, nutrition, training, all that stuff, right? Because let's face it, we all know that most of the value is going to come from lifestyle modifications. Yep. Yes, I completely agree that in certain cases, we're talking about people who have very much perturbed underlying physiologies, and they can benefit tremendously from targeted novel therapies, i.e. peptides, but still, a very significant part of the improvement is going to stem from lifestyle modification. So how do you merge the two? Basic traditional lifestyle modifications, nutrition training with novel stuff? And then do you think that the introduction of novels, more novel therapies and treatments increases engagement on the other side?
Yeah, so for us, we always start with the building blocks. And like to your point, it's really lifestyle modification is going to be the biggest mover in a lot of those cases. So one of the examples that I use is hormone therapy. So if you take testosterone therapy for males, for example, a lot of times the testosterone deficiency that's being experienced in the system is directly related to lifestyle. It's related to diet. It's related to sleep. It's related to a lot of different things in the person's systems. And a lot of times if we remediate those numbers will naturally come up. And so where we want to apply novel therapy like testosterone therapy is when we can isolate that it's directly related to the body's natural production when everything is functioning properly. So if we get the systems aligned and we get the system functioning properly, and they're still presenting with low testosterone levels, for example, then we can apply that particular therapy as an enhancement once we have all of the other components dialed in.
Most people, when they walk into a clinic, right, what they do is they expect to get the pill. They expect to get the shortcut. And 100%. They talk to someone who's like, hey, we're going to start off with the difficult part, which is lifestyle modifications. maybe they get disenchanted, maybe they get discouraged, maybe they're like, no, I mean, this person's just telling me to eat healthy and go to the gym. Like, I already knew that. How do you manage this communications issue, and how do you get people to stay engaged?
Yeah, so for us, it's really an education process. And so what we've done is we've trained our staff whenever we're doing consultations to really kind of break it down and understanding. So the first step before we do any work with anybody is we go through a consultation. And so when we do that, we leverage that consultation to really understand how our ecosystem really works. And it's an opportunity for us to educate the customer. So whether or not they purchase from us or do any sort of plans or programming with us, the education piece is really important. And so we leverage that consultation to kind of educate them on their systems, right? And educate them on how all the pieces and parts really work together. And I think part of the other challenge is to your point, everybody is so conditioned to walking into either a hormone clinic or a doctor's office. And if they go in with a problem, they're expecting to come out with something that's going to remediate that problem, right? You walk in, you have this and this going on into a doctor's office. They're going to give you medication. You go pick it up at the pharmacy and you're on your way. So it's that mentality of that quick fix. And so the problem with that, and what we try to explain to our clients, is when you do that and you just cover up symptoms, eventually what happens is you have this compounding effect of all of these symptoms that you've put Band-Aids over time. And eventually it's going to catch up with you. No matter how much you try to cover those symptoms, eventually your body can only sustain so much before it's going to give up on you. Right. And so you have to, instead of compounding with just applying Band-Aids to a symptomatic problem that you're having with a quick fix, right? We have to look deeper under the hood and understanding the root cause of how the systems are functioning. And so for us, it's really around education. And we just have policies in place to where, for example, we won't do GLP medications for people without going through an assessment first. We just won't do it. It's just, I would rather not service that customer. If we try to educate that customer and they still just want medications because they saw something online or they saw, a friend that went on it or whatever, we just won't absorb that liability for putting somebody on these types of therapies without having an accurate assessment of what their systems are functioning. And so, we've lost, clients because of that, because they're looking for the quick fix, but there's a number of other options they can source for doing that. It may not be the best business practice, but we know that when we're implementing programs and policies and protocols with clients, we know that it's being done the right way. And I think you'll see, because right now it's kind of the Wild West when it comes to this stuff, but I think over time, as they release some of the regulations around therapies and hormone therapy, you're already seeing it with the hormone therapies and the black box warnings being removed for hormone therapy for women. I think you're going to see a lot more of that regulation come into play. And what's going to happen is the companies that have not structured themselves the right way are going to lose their ability to practice those therapies, I think, over time.
Totally. And I think, Jason, what we are also seeing from our affiliates, again, PNOE doesn't really sell anything to consumers, so we don't have a direct contact with the consumer, but we obviously hear what is going on in the market. The majority of customers turning towards our industry, the integrative medicine industry, holistic medicine industry, are actually looking to spend time with someone. They're vying for this holistic approach. So I think if you're structuring something that is holistic, that aims to be something that's more long term, that addresses the fundamental drivers of your disease or issue, I think you're much more likely to address what most people are looking for. Obviously, there is going to be some percentage of people gunning for the pill, even though they're not approaching a traditional doctor. But I think you're spot on when it comes to that. Any other thoughts around biometric testing that you would like to share with people here? Anything related to DNA testing specifically? I go to trade shows all the time, and I see more and more DNA testing companies popping up here and there. And I think one of the biggest questions that we keep getting from our affiliates is, how does that fit in with the rest, right? Because VO2 max, metabolic rate, hormone levels, like body composition, like we can all wrap our minds around that. It's sort of like part of standard of care and whatnot. But DNA testing and all that stuff is very foreign to a lot of people. And for the most part, I don't think they have any clue when it comes to merging it in the clinical decision-making process along with other stuff they may be doing. So any thoughts or any insights around that?
Yeah, so DNA pathway mapping and functional genomics is a little bit of a touchy subject for a number of different reasons. And you're right, you're seeing it start to pop up in a lot of different places. And so that comes with a couple of caveats. So the one warning that I give to people when it comes to going down the path of genomics testing is you really need to understand the company that you're working with. Because you need to understand where that data is going and who has access to that data. Because a lot of times with a lot of these companies, unfortunately, you as the client are not the consumer, because DNA data is extremely valuable to a lot of different organizations, whether it be pharmaceuticals, whether it be medical, whether it be, we're seeing it pop up more and more in the insurance space. And I think you're going to start seeing a shift in how insurance is actually provided. And I think it's going to be similar to like vehicle insurance, to where if you are high risk, whether it be separate from pre-existing conditions, I think if you have genetic markers, right, that are predisposed for certain cardiovascular issues, cancer, things like that, I think you're going to see some of that popping up. And we're already seeing that in the medical community. I mean, I've seen hospitals that are offering, because they see the power of genetic testing when it comes to the consumers and being able to give them insight into their body's genetics. And they're offering it for free. I mean, we saw one hospital out here that offered free genetic testing to the client base, and they had 100,000 people sign up in 2.5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, you're talking about a system that you don't really know where that data is going to go. Is it going to pharmaceutical companies so that they can change how they're doing pathways for medications and things like that? So you have to be really, really careful. And so we spent a lot of time in really understanding that, and we partnered up with some of the top. We partnered with one of the top companies and probably one of the foremost experts in the space, with Kashif Khan and with the DNA company. So Tracy is over at the DNA company, and I believe they're going to be at the A4M conference here coming up in Vegas. But incredible company. It's a closed ecosystem, and so it's totally contained inside of this environment, inside of our ecosystem, and inside of the DNA company's ecosystem, which was one of the huge benefits, is that data does not leave the ecosystem, and it's protected and encrypted data. So, so that's kind of a caveat that I always explain with pathway mapping. So as far as genetic pathway mapping and how it's implemented and how we implement it in our system, is when I explain genetic pathway mapping to people, I explain it, think of it like a blueprint for a house. The one benefit to our genetic structure is that it does not change, right? So based on our genetic composition, we're born with that. And that tells us how our body systems are built. Right. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that if we have genetic markers, we're automatically going to get X, Y, and Z. It just means we're more predisposed because we either have something in our system or we're lacking something in our system that may need additional levels of support. And so when you understand that blueprint and you understand things like how your body absorbs nutrients, how you methylate vitamins, how your body processes toxins in your system, these different types of things, when you understand that, you can more closely tailor therapies and that to those genetic pathways. One of the basic examples that I give to clients when I'm explaining this on site is take a keto diet, for example, right? For one person, and you'll hear some people say, oh, keto works awesome. I've done it and I feel great on it. I do great all the time. And then other people you talk to, they're like, oh my God, it was the most horrible thing that I've ever done. I was sick the whole time and everything else. And a lot of that time, it's because of their genetic pathways, because their genetic pathways are just not set up to be able to handle that in their systems. And so when you understand that, it allows you to more closely tailor therapies to those different types of pathways in somebody's systems.
Totally. I understand, obviously, genetic blueprint doesn't really change. Like, we have it since we're embryos, we have it
Mhm.
pretty much unchanged through our lives. And if someone finds our fossils a million years from now, it will still be there unchanged. What about epigenetic testing? Our epigenome actually changes, right? So
Yeah, epigenome for
any,
sure changes.
anything to see there? Any like interesting observations you've seen from your practice? Is this something that you're implementing? Is there real value in the sense that it produces actionable insights for people?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what we use it for. So we leverage that for exactly that. And so that's how you really, when we start talking, the big buzzword that everybody's used is biooptimization. And when you want to biooptimize properly, you really have to understand all of these systems, but all these systems are all co-linked and they're interlinked together, which is why the assessment testing across the board is so important, because you really need to have an understanding of how those systems work in order to influence those decisions, especially around lifestyle, exposure, environmental exposure, food selections, all these different types of things. But yeah, it's directly related to epigenetics for sure.
No, that's very helpful. Cool. That was pretty much everything on my end. I think we have a little bit of time left, and we can open it up to questions for anyone who wants to ask Jason anything that we didn't cover. You can use a Q&A function.
Oh, let me see. I don't think I can see it on my end. You may just have to read me the questions.
No, yeah, I will.
I'll pick a couple good ones that you think are helpful, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability.
Yeah. By the way, Jason, will you be at A4M this year?
I will. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. We'll see.
I've got to come out to. I got to fly out for a couple of our centers that we're doing out in California, and then I got to fly into Vegas to do an event at the SiriusXM studios, and then I'm going to stay a couple extra days for A4M.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Awesome. So we actually have one question from Hillary. After the initial consultation, is there a standard starting point for testing, or is it a customized process for every patient?
So a lot of times it's a standard process, and so we have all of our assessment protocols that we have available, but we usually just try to pick one or two that's going to give us the most insight into where that individual appears to have the most challenges based on how they're presenting symptomatically and what their goals are. And so we'll try to pick, one or two testing procedures to at least get a starting point. And so we do that. And what we've done is we've tried to keep the assessment costs as low as possible for two reasons. One, it gives clients access to their data. And when you have clients that are more educated on their systems, it makes them much more informed consumers. And secondly, it makes our staff more highly efficient. So the more buy-in we can get from the clients on assessment testing, the more accurate our clinicians can be on providing recommendations.
No, that's very helpful. I think that's a question for me. Do you have any clinics or assessments in Canada? It may be for Jason. So if this is a question for PNOE, yeah, we do have quite a few providers in Canada. But Jason, do you work with anyone in Canada, or do you intend to set up shop in Canada? I'm guessing main focus is some US cities for the time being, right?
Yeah, the main focus is with the US cities. And really what we did was when I built the architecture, so what we built was we built it to be a turnkey national franchise. And so what I wanted to do and what my concept behind building the franchise was to give medical professionals and wellness practitioners the ability to have a turnkey drop-in ecosystem that they can run their systems off of. And so that's why we've aligned all the partnerships with companies like PNOE to be able to have a turnkey drop-in solution and have all the architecture that surrounds it with all of the infrastructure that we built, because it took us quite a bit of time to actually build out all the infrastructure that was needed, from AI infrastructure to CRM systems to how we market it, the testing procedures and protocols that we use, the clinicians that we have, and the specialists that we have on the back end to actually build the assessment reports and those types of things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Canada will be a market for us for sure as we continue to expand our footprint.
Awesome. Another one from Hillary. How would that current turnkey process work for an existing wellness practice wanting to implement your protocols?
So there's a couple different ways that we've done this in the past. We've done it with collaborations to where we'll come in and augment a facility. So a lot of traffic that we're seeing, or a lot of interest that we're seeing, is when you have a lot of these recovery facilities that are just doing recovery and recovery modalities, red light therapy, they're doing spa treatments and things like that, but they want to incorporate or offer wellness to their clients. They just don't have the capabilities or the resources on site to be able to do it. And so we've done some collaborations in the past where we augment that staff and we leverage our back-end infrastructure and the things that we build and the teams that we've built to kind of augment that on site at a location. So, I mean, there's a couple different ways that we've navigated that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess that was pretty much it. Well, Jason, thank you so much again for taking the time. I guess I'll see you in Vegas. And for anyone listening, PNOE is obviously going to be in A4M. Excited to see all of you guys there if you're attending. And yeah, thank you so much again for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, sounds good. Good to see you as always.
Yeah.